All that I can remember about Bale is that he's a new optional boss that you fight in the DLC. And I think he and Plagiarisax had a fight in the past, and that's why Plagiarisax is missing a bunch of heads. Actually, I think you can even see those heads on the back of Bale's back. Or something like that. But anyways, guys, as per usual, make sure to go support the OG video. Link to that is at the very top of the description. Now with that out of the way, let's learn about some more Elden Ring lore.
Ages ago, before the Erd Tree, the Elden Lord Placidusax was challenged by Bale, a dragon that lacked the stone scales that made his kin immortal. So, in mutual hatred, they fought, flesh against stone.
Why didn't he have the stone scales? Dude, this is an incredible shot.
Welcome to our second video on the Dragons of Elden Ring, which refines their stories with the extra content we now have from the Shadow of the Erd Tree.
I did watch the first video that Vaati did on the Lore of the Dragons. I think it's not on the YouTube channel because the file got corrupted. So unfortunately, those are one of the lost recordings that I have. Rip, dude. But I can remember some details from that video, so don't worry.
The DLC has revealed many truths regarding the Drakes, Dragon Communion, and so much more. But what I want to start this video off with is the Crucible, because I think it actually has a lot to do with the story of Placidusax and Bale. So what is the Crucible? Well, the aspects of the Crucible describe it as a place where all life was once blended together, and Ordovis's greatsword says that it has a red tint that exemplifies the nature of primordial gold, which is said to be close in nature to life itself. This primordial matter, as it's called in the Gilded Greatshield description, would eventually go on to become the Erd Tree. But this always confused me, because if the Crucible existed at the beginning of life on this world, before the Elden Ring, then how could the Crucible have traces of gold?
Oh man, for all the videos that we've seen from Vaati, there's always been some sort of talk about the Crucible and what it could potentially be, and these pieces of evidence that suggest one particular thing, and then conflicting evidence as well. There's so many theories about this. I don't know if the DLC clears up any of that, but hopefully it does, so Vaati can finally have his answer.
Shouldn't the gold have come from the Elden Ring, which we know arrived
That's
later?
what it would suggest.
It didn't make sense to me, but now, with the DLC, I think I understand. Count Ymir brings us the revelation that life itself was created in a cosmic rupture of the Greater Will long ago. We know that the Greater Will has gold as its aspect, and so it is that I think gold is just an innate part of the primordial matter of the world, even before the Elden Ring made landfall and put its roots into the Crucible, so to speak. All of this is to say that now I think the ancient dragons were some of the earliest beings born from this primordial soup. They embody many aspects of the Crucible, after all. Horn, tail, breath, wing, fang. So when Meta, Mother of Fingers, arrived on this world to scout things out, I think the ancient dragons might have been the earliest candidates for lordship. Then,
Placidusax was the first Elden Lord, if I recall correctly. But I don't recall if there was a war. No, there was a war between the Golden Order and the dragons, right? In order to take the Elden Ring from them. That might not have been the initial reason, but maybe it was a byproduct of that. A little bit hazy on that particular detail.
Ring was sent down in the form of the Elden Beast upon a golden star, and with that I think these ancients of the Crucible were granted order. Remember, the Elden Beast is the living incarnation of the concept of order. And incidentally, the Elden Beast's internal name is Nebula Dragon. And it does somewhat resemble an ancient dragon. It even spews the same golden breath as Placidusax does. Of course, these things could be just coincidental, but what if they're not? What if the Elden Beast's form was chosen to help ensure that this vassal beast and the concept of order would be accepted by the ancient dragons? That's a fun thought, I think.
You know, that doesn't seem too far off, because there is a lot of visual consistency when it comes to the Elden Ring lore. Whether that be through the architecture, or like even the specific color of magic abilities, or even the minute details of like the attack animations of certain characters being similar to other characters because they had learned that technique from those people, or this particular school of magic or whatever. It's pretty insane how much thought and attention to detail has gone into this game, and I really appreciate it for that fact. Although, realistically speaking, there's probably a ton of things as well that, like, the Elden Ring theorists have kind of made a connection with each other that wasn't really intended by the devs, considering, like, how big and massive the game is. So there may be some things we've accepted as the truth, and maybe the devs have kind of rolled with it. I don't know how involved they are, or, like, how many tabs they keep on the theorist community.
Whatever the case, we learn from the remembrance of the Dragon Lord that Placidusax was chosen as Elden Lord. But the question remains, who was his god? Who would be the vessel of the Elden Ring? Was it actually the Elden Beast? Or, more likely, I think, did he have a god equivalent to Marika?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I think, yeah, there was a god equivalent, but we had kind of surmised that they had fled. There were also some other theories where she had been killed, or whatever god entity had been taken out by the Golden Order. The memories are slowly coming back to me. I'm not sure, like, which ones are right, though. But anyways, with the new info for the DLC, a lot of these theories are likely going to change, so let's just go with it.
Who chose him as Elden Lord in the first place? In the end, we just don't know. All we do know is that something went wrong with Placidusax's order, and his god eventually fled, with Placidusax endlessly awaiting their return. Whoever they were, it's possible that this god was also an Empyrean, a valid candidate for godhood. And like the other Empyreans that we know of, it's possible that Placidusax's god was also an Empyrean chosen by the Fingers. And that idea makes me wonder if Meta, Mother of Fingers, held any influence in this Dragon Age. The main reference to fingers in this age comes from the Cincadea, a 5-fingered dagger wielded by the high-ranking clergyman of Farum Azula who served the dragons. The Cincadea celebrates a beast's 5 fingers, which are symbolic of the intelligence granted upon their kind. Now, this description doesn't mention who or what granted the beast's intelligence, but in an older version of this description, it does. Back in version 1.0, it was said to be the Greater Will that granted the beast's intelligence. So, this mention of the Greater Will was removed by From Software, and yet it does make sense that the Greater Will would bestow intelligence upon the beasts.
But then why would they remove it, unless if it was like giving misinformation, or maybe they wanted it to remain more mysterious? Perhaps they wanted to shift the lore in a different direction when it comes to that. The importance of fingers in Elden Ring, it cannot be underestimated. And I remember that we did talk about these beastmen in, it was probably during the dragon video as well. But by gifting them intelligence, did it have to do with like giving them thumbs so that they could actually make and use tools? I don't know. That sounds like a reasonable, logical conclusion to me.
Considering Placidusax was Elden Lord at the time. So here's my theory on why it was removed. What if From Software removed this mention of the Greater Will because they wanted to keep the lore a little bit more open-ended? What if they wanted to leave room down the line for another character who might have been capable of bestowing intelligence on behalf of the Greater Will? This is just an idea, but what if it was Meta who granted intelligence to the beasts through fingers? But however it happened, the beasts did gain intelligence, and a really great line on that topic comes to us from the description of bestial vitality, which reads, "Having gained intelligence, the beasts must have felt how their wildness slipped away as civilization took hold." The way this last line is worded is strangely sad.
Well,
I feel like it
slipped
highlights
away.
that while something was being gained here, thanks to the intelligence
lost
that was being bestowed upon them, a crucial
part of
of the
themselves.
beast's nature was being lost as well. Order had taken their wildness away. And just like with the aspects of the Crucible, such wildness and chaos would one day be looked back upon with scorn. But as we know from characters like Godfrey, the chains of order can be thrown off and wildness can be embraced. Just so, aspects of the Crucible can persist, even if they are suppressed. For these horns, feathers, fangs, all, according to the DLC, are interminable evolutionary gifts and symbols of primacy, seemingly baked into the DNA of all life born from the Crucible. This is why I think that at certain points in history, the Crucible of Life would randomly throw a curveball into the mix, a wild card that challenges the established order. In the Golden Age of the Erd Tree, it
Perhaps the Crucible was looking more for like biodiversity and had a lot of importance set to that, rather than having a particular image of what the creatures should be. All the creatures born from the Crucible, that is. Because if we're going to go out the theory of them constantly throwing a curveball every now and then that feels about right to me. Nature can be very wild and chaotic, and I feel like that just fits in perfectly with what the Crucible is meant to represent.
was the Omen and the Misbegotten. And in the Golden Age of the Ancient Dragons, I'd like to propose that this curveball was Baal the Dread.
So, is that why he doesn't have the stone scales that everybody else
There
does?
is something that I think is really interesting about Baal's heart. The first thing you'll probably notice about Baal's heart is that it's fleshy and biatrial, as opposed to the hearts of the ancient dragons, which are literally
stone.
made of stone. This, I think, was a part of a genetic mutation, one that made Baal weaker in the sense that he was born mortal, without the stone scales of the ancient dragons that twist time and make them undying. But I think it also made him stronger in the sense that he was filled with a mad hunger and a fierceness of spirit that you'd think could only come from one faced with the inevitable prospect of death.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about Baal's heart is that it's dotted with horn-like gravel stones. Gravel
The
stones,
Crucible?
as you may know, are the compound stones that make up the stone scales of the ancient dragons. And gravel stone is found within the hearts of all of the drakes. But what makes Baal's heart different is that the gravel stone in his heart is uniquely horn-like. And considering the significance of horns in the DLC, the fact they spell this out must suggest a connection to the Crucible, right? I feel like there's no way this description is a coincidence. The Beast Horn item from the DLC explains that the Crucible has a particularly strong influence on the beasts of the Realm of Shadow, causing many to grow horns despite the characteristics of their species. It was in this land that the vitality of the Crucible flourished, and so it is that I think Baal's biatrial heart, dotted with horn-like gravel stones and glistening with deep red liquor, was likely a mutation of the Crucible. Thus, Baal, father of the Drakes, was born as the first of the ancient dragon's low-born descendants.
I do find it quite interesting, though, that the Crucible has a very big influence on the land of the dead, despite being, you know, an ancient primordial culmination of nature. It's also a very common trope in media that the mortal beings of a particular race will have a much more fiery ambition than the more immortal beings of a different race. I mean, if any of you guys have watched Freerun, you guys probably know what I'm talking about. The classic one with elves having a very different outlook on life and having much less ambition because they feel like they have an enormous amount of time to achieve it anyways. Whereas for humans who have a much shorter lifespan, you gotta get shit done, or else you're gonna die and not achieve anything. But I do wonder if Baal's existence is specifically for him to challenge Plagiarisax? Or was it simply a byproduct of the mutation of him being mortal, and thus that kind of had a domino effect leading him to challenge Plagiarisax?
These drakes are unique from the ancient dragons. Whereas the ancient dragons have 4 limbs, 4 wings, stone scales, red lightning, and 2 horns, the drakes have 2 hind legs, 2 wings, and a single horn. Most importantly though, they don't have stone scales, making them mortal and paltry compared to their forebears. But if Baal was the father, then who was the mother? Well, it can only really be Grail, the great mother of dragons, who
the
might
mother
have
of
been
all
born
dragons.
in a similar way to Baal, or perhaps she's even the product of Baal mating with a different ancient dragon and continued Baal's bloodline on her own. It's not completely clear. Whatever the case, as time went on, it seems Baal's descendants became lesser, not only compared to the ancient dragons, but compared to Baal himself as well. And I say this because Baal's later descendants are lacking a few of his key aspects. Take Baal's magma aspect, for instance. According to the Talisman of Dread, this aspect was so strong that when Baal roared, it would cause the jagged peak's molten fury to boil and churn. And I love this design choice for Baal because it's so poetic. Baal is born of the ancient dragons who were made of rock, and what is magma but molten rock?
Yeah.
Baal's fire is noted to be incredibly fierce, so if Baal had any stone scales, perhaps they were melted away. I believe this fierce fire is also a defining trait of...
That's actually a really good theory. Maybe he had the stone scales before, but because he was also born with this hot magma, it ended up removing it and making this genetic mutation, essentially. Although, if that were the case, then that means that all the drakes that are descended from him would also have a similar situation going on with them, which I don't think is the case. It's still fun to think about, though.
Of Baal's kin as well. You'll note that every furnace golem has a drake inside of its basket, and it's been speculated that these bodies might have played a part in fueling these monstrosities. Speaking of Baal's fire, even Baal's red lightning is touched by flame. It's explicitly called flame lightning, and it's unique not only to him, but also to a few of the other drakes on the Jagged Peak. This is significant because
they are his
red
descendants.
lightning was a hallmark of the ancient dragons, and none of Baal's later descendants have mastered lightning at all. Specifically, the drakes that can summon flame lightning are the Jagged Peak drakes encountered on your ascent up the mountain. These ones exclusively drop an item called Dragon Scale Flesh.
I would assume that these particular dragons are a little bit closer to Baal when it comes to the family tree. Because, yeah, it does seem like the traits that made Baal unique and strong kind of slowly diminished over time. And even without the confirmation that, it's supposed to be a red lightning mixed with fire, it does give up a very different visual feel than the usual red lightning that the ancient dragons use, which is a cool touch. What was his name? Vike? Something like that? I know that there was a guy who befriended a dragon and was able to use the red lightning, or was taught how to use it, but later on ended up falling to the frenzied flame. Pretty sure that's the only other person outside of the ancient dragons who could use the red lightning,
which marks them as aged dragons. Baal too is called an old dragon, so perhaps their older bloodline, being closer to the ancient dragons, explains this unique lightning that they've retained, something that their descendants have lost over time. I want to note also that Dragon Scale Flesh mentions these Jagged Peak drakes have inverted scales, which actually look a lot like gravel stones, so perhaps these drakes really are supposed to be closer to the ancients in bloodline and nature.
It just
even
makes
if
sense.
Their models aren't any different than the other countless drakes in the game. Another interesting thing about Baal's Flame Lightning incantation and his other Dragon Communion incantation is that they both require pure arcane to cast, as opposed to something like Placidusax's Ruin, which is cast with pure faith. Placidusax having faith is easy enough to explain. Placidus Axe was Elden Lord to the Greater Will, and retains his faith, even in his place beyond time, after being abandoned. So, of course, his remembrance incantation also requires faith to channel. As for Bale's arcane incantations, well, arcane is a little bit trickier to explain as a stat, but basically...
Yeah, I still have yet to play the game. I do have it. It just needs to win a poll someday. So I can only kind of like pick up from the context of what these stats actually affect and like what you guys have told me in the comment sections. But now that makes me curious. Is it only specifically Placidus Axe who needs a faith stat? Whereas for all the other dragons, they use an arcane stat? Or is it specifically Bale who is different from all the other dragons? Or is there just like no other dragon that you need to worry about what stats you have? I think it's called a remembrance, right? I forgot. He literally just said it. But from my understanding, it's an ability that you can use that you collect from the boss after you defeat them, from like a game mechanic standpoint.
Arcane relates to one's innate qualities. The arcane weapons of Okayu, for example, can be swung through the air via the wielder's will alone. And the Albinaurics, born of primordial dew, are said to cast sorcery with their innate arcaneness. So when it comes to Bale, of course he would have incantations that require the highest arcane investment, because he's a character defined by his unwavering will and fury. But why? Why was Bale so furious? Well, one clue might come from the horn-sent phantom in the Elder's hovel, who implores Bale to hurry and lay it all to waste. To lay waste to the proud, the conceited, every last one of that arrogant lot. To be clear, this elder horn-sent phantom might be calling on Bale to lay Marika and her kin to waste, specifically.
I mean, that would make a lot of sense for them.
They purged his kind.
Yeah.
But I think there's a parallel being drawn between the Golden Order and the Ancient Dragon Order here. I think this elder considers them all a part of the same arrogant lot. A defining...
Hey, I mean, classic chaos versus order argument. I can see that being the case.
Trait of the Greater Will's orders across every age we know of, after all, is a pride among those in power and their dismissal of those seen as lesser. In the age of the Erd Tree, the lesser were those touched by the Crucible, the Tarnished, and many more besides. And in the age of the Ancient Dragons, the lessers were the Beasts, who the Dragon Priestess actually insults as foul and lowly in the DLC.
Bruh.
And then eventually the Drakes too were considered foul and lowly, and the Ancients would go on to have intense hatred for them as they considered them their lowborn kin.
But they can't help it. That's just how they were born. It's not like they chose to be born as lesser as everyone. But I suppose that is what comes with the order of things. And so it becomes all too evident why those lower on the pecking order would want Bale to burn it all down. Perhaps Bale is even the manifestation of that desire.
So yeah, I think there's a parallel between the Ancient Dragon's Order and Marika's, and I think this is why the Elder Horn-sent Phantom is calling on Bale to lay waste to all of it. Now, the Ancient Dragons might be excessively prideful in all of their depictions, but I do want to note that Bale was likely once on their side, because as we've discussed with Marika, being called a traitor suggests that there was a kinship originally at some point.
So is Bale also referred to as a traitor? In which case, I wonder what happened between him and Placidus Axe, or maybe it was something to do with the Order, or potentially even the god that oversaw all of this. Like, how did this conflict begin initially?
Bale might have had a kinship with the Ancient Dragons as well. It might not have been a great kinship, but he must have been considered a part of their order, at least. But then the Ancient Dragons would label him a tyrant, and it all suggests that Bale went against the established order and an established peace, harbinging destruction upon it all, as retribution for their conceit and their discrimination, perhaps. I think, just like with Seath the Scaleless from Dark Souls, Bale sought revenge upon his pride.
Dude, I gotta go back and learn about the lore of Dark Souls too. That's gonna be a whole nother can of beans to open. But with how FromSoft has written their games, I can only assume that it's gonna be top tier. So, does that mean this entire rebellion, well, basically one dragon rebellion, is all because of the discrimination they had against him for not having the scales and potentially being seen as lesser than them, even though he was kind of a part of their order, maybe? Perhaps to the ancient dragons, simply not having the stone scales and not being able to manipulate time in order to become like an immortal being is seen as a weakness, which, yeah, I get. I understand. That does seem like a weakness.
Dreadful, immortal kin. There's a huge parallel between these two characters, but unlike Seath, who switched sides to find his advantage, Bale took a way more direct approach and challenged the Dragon Lord himself.
Bale's like, screw this, I'm going in. I've had enough of this world. Also, he doesn't have wings. His wings are broken. Does that mean he uses magical wings that he summons? You can kind of see it there in the animation, but it's a little bit hard to make out what exactly it's made out of.
According to the Talisman of the Dread, Bale's challenge to the ancient Dragon Lord ended in grievous mutual injury, which has forced his weight to now be supported by his tail. And he lost a talon, which now terminates in a sharp bone that's wreathed in lightning. And as for Placidusax's wounds,
wow,
his body is covered in scars and gashes.
You can still see it till today.
His tail has been cut, and most notably, 3
missing
of his
heads.
5 heads have been severed, 2 of which are still clenched upon Bale's body to this day. The Dragon Priestess notes that after inflicting and suffering these grievous wounds, Bale made a hasty retreat. But the damage was done, clearly, and I reckon we could even speculate that perhaps Bale's assault even played a part in why Placidusax's god fled. Or perhaps a part in why Placidusax decided to hide away, safe in this place beyond time.
There's still so many questions as to like who this god was, what their role was exactly, and why they fled. Like, for what specific purpose was the fleeing happening? So I guess all we can really do is just throw a bunch of theories at the wall and hopefully one of them sticks.
This part of the timeline is still unclear to me, but I think Bale's tyranny did do damage, whenever it was that it occurred. And after this, it inspired Placidusax to hatch a plan. For as he did with Bale, he saw in man a fierce spirit and insatiable hunger. The very things that he thought might one day fell Bale the Dread and his drakes, who would become sacrifices.
Oh, the Dragon Communion, right? Wait, did we know this piece of information before? Because what this is suggesting is that the people who hunt down dragons were basically made to do so by the dragons. Well, the ancient dragons. So Placidusax literally like put up a bounty for Bale's head and made the organization to do it. Dragon Communion is, dragon sacrifice, same thing.
In a time long past, Bale turned upon the Dragon Lord. The foul traitor assailed our master and inflicted a grievous wound, only to
assuming
make
this
a
is the Dragon
retreat,
Priest,
becoming a sworn enemy of the Brood. Since that day, Bale and his bloodline, the Drakes, have served as sacrifices for Dragon Communion.
This is Florisax, the Dragon Priestess, and here at the Grand Altar she explains the origins of Dragon Communion. That there is a mad hunger and fierceness of spirit that only flows from those young and short of sight, and that after being wounded, Placidusax saw in mankind these qualities that could one day bring about Bale's doom. This hunger, unfathomable to the ancient dragons, would be weaponized. And so the ancients tempted the Drake warriors with the hearts of the Drakes, who were their low-born kin turned foe. To me, this is one of the most satisfying lore points of the DLC. previously, we only knew that Drake warriors were driven to consume dragon hearts and pursue the strength of dragons for the sake of the sublime beauty and awe that the dragons inspired. And that was reason enough, but it's such a great unexpected twist that Dragon Communion was founded to tempt Drake warriors to consume the heart of Baal, in what the Dragon Priestess calls the purest form of communion, the fullest.
So maybe even the Drake warriors themselves don't know this, and they were simply tempted by the ancient dragons. And then the ancient dragons were like, hey, there's this group of people who are as stupid as Baal, and we can make them work for us without letting them know that they're working for us. Honestly, that's a galaxy brain plan. Simply tempt them with the power and the beauty of potentially becoming a dragon, and tell them, hey, here, consume the heart. I mean, that's kind of like the best way to kill a dragon, right? Like, that's guaranteed. If they have the heart of the dragon, that dragon is dead. So yeah, well, I mean, I don't know all the other plot points from the DLC, but I can agree with Vaati here when, like, that kind of revelation is just so satisfying in really any series.
Sating of hunger and consummation as a dragon whole. And speaking of Dragon Communion origins, from the Rock Heart, we learn that the first partakers of Dragon Communion were humans who actually consumed the rock hearts of ancient dragons, not the fleshy hearts of drakes. These rock hearts of the ancients were consumed in the ancient original form of Dragon Communion, turning the humans into a new form for the first time. So one thing I've been wondering is why the original form of Dragon Communion required this consumption of ancient dragon hearts specifically.
Then yeah, that just kind of throws a wrench to the theory of the ancient dragons tricking humanity and trying to use them to get rid of the drakes. Or maybe they sacrificed a few ancient dragons to get them hooked. I don't know.
Were these test subjects of sorts? Or perhaps a showcase of what Drake Knights could aspire to? As far as I can tell, there are 3 stone hearts in-game. One belongs to the ancient dragon man in the dragon pit. One, I assume, would belong to whoever left it behind upon the jagged peak. And the last belongs to the dragon priestess. According to her heart, the priestess was once an ancient dragon herself, but sacrificed that form for feeble flesh to aid in the destruction of Baal the Dread.
Oh, no, that's right. The people who consume the hearts are consumed by the dragon's soul itself, right? So they just become that dragon? I think that's how that worked, because the power overtakes them.
She assumed human form to share dragon communion with the world, and to this end she attends the Grand Altar, bestowing the favor of the Dragon Lord upon the Drake warriors who passed through here in that pursuit of Baal. The fact that Florisax attends a site of Dragon Communion makes me wonder if the 2 ancient dragons with rock hearts might have sacrificed their original forms in a similar way, giving up their hearts to take over the bodies of the first partakers of Dragon Communion. And this is just speculation, but there is a dead ancient dragon at each of the 2 sites of Dragon Communion in the lands between, so
that's
what
their
if
original
these
bodies
were the 2 ancient dragons who gave up their rock hearts? That's a fun theory, I think. The idea that these rock hearts were given up willingly is supported by the fact that we know the first partakers of Dragon Communion were loyal to the ancient dragons and dedicated to their cause. For evidence of this, let's analyze the ancient dragon man, starting with the dragon hunter's katana that he drops.
Looks
This
sick.
katana is bristling with a spine of gravelstone and has what is called a jagged gravelstone aura, which is akin to the aura that the Dragon Communion basins give off. Fittingly too, for this agent of the ancient dragons, his weapon, like all gravelstone weapons, has an anti-dragon effect.
Of course.
But his role wasn't solely to hunt the drakes. His katana reads, formerly a Dragon Communion warrior, the ancient dragon man was once arbiter of those worthy to devour Baal. That is,
the dreaded
before you
one.
killed him and took his weapon for your own hunt. And incidentally, the ancient dragon man's death might be what allows Egon to progress in his quest.
I am sorry. I repent. Oh, come no closer. Oh, the horror. Please, savage me no further.
So this pleading from Egon could be directed at Bale, who does haunt him and who is a dragon one should dread, but his begging for mercy could also be directed at the ancient dragon man, whose red phantom is just down the way, acting, as we mentioned, as a judge of those worthy to devour Bale, the dreaded one. But Egon wounds...
So is Egon just not strong enough to defeat him, so he can't go to face Bale? Well, that's unfortunate. Although, to be fair, if you can't defeat the Dragon Warrior, I don't think you're defeating Bale.
Wounded as he is from a previous encounter with Bale, he's in no state to challenge the ancient dragon man, let alone Bale himself. Fittingly, it's been showcased by Zlovsky II that the ancient dragon man's human visage is draconian in origin, and as per the character creation screen, Draconians have the stony face of the people of the ancient dragons. As mentioned in our previous video on dragons, there is evidence of humans being within the ancient dragons' culture upon Farum Azula, so perhaps the man who consumed this dragon heart was once loyal to their order. Alternatively, if you're in the camp of those who believe that this face was never meant to be seen, you could opt to believe that the ancient dragon man was once from the land of reeds, given he wields a great katana. Dragon communion warriors are commonly from the land of reeds, it seems. You can look to Yura and Eleonora, or even the great katana looted near the Ghost Flame Dragon in the...
What is going on in the land of reeds? I mean, it's basically messed up Japan, right? Maybe they're all a little bit too into Monster Hunter, so they wanted to do Monster Hunter in real life, but like the best thing they could find were the dragons. But that also means that all these guys are longsword players. Oh no.
Graveside Plains as more proof of that. But whoever the ancient dragon man was, now he occupies the dragon pit, which from the environment you can figure out is actually a bastion of those in service to the ancient dragons in the realm of shadow. And I say this because the lead up to the dragon pit features a ton of ancient dragon statues, though they've all fallen into disrepair. Additionally, in the dragon pit itself, you'll find fire-breathing beastmen who we know were servants of the ancient dragons, and the basins here are filled with what I can only assume is the
dragon
blood of drakes. This is a place
blood.
that serves the process of dragon communion, and there's even a magma worm here that resides. As you would have
wait, the magma worms they were Drake warriors who consumed a heart, and that kind of goes terribly wrong, and so they become this instead of, actually looking cool like a dragon. I think that was their lore.
Learned from our last video on the dragons, the magma worms were once dragon communion warriors. According to the magma breath incantation, those who have dined on the hearts of drakes will find their humanity slowly slipping away, and once they fully succumb to their fate, they are left no more than worms that crawl the earth. So when a drake warrior eats a drake heart, they inevitably, it seems, turn into magma worms. And I think we can finally understand why by talking about what happens to us when we consume Bale's heart at the grand altar and harness his power. His incantations both read, even after being consumed, the throbbing heart of Bale continues to resist its subjugation, never weakening. One day the fire within will consume the very body and soul of its communion devourer. One day. So could this never-weakening resistance not also be true for the hearts of dragons that Drake warriors consume? As mentioned by the Magma Breath incantation, it is the fate of those who partake in dragon communion to succumb and become a magma worm, which I think finally makes sense because Bale is a magma dragon, and the drakes are his kin, who have inherited his heat. Even before the DLC, the Magma Worm's scale sword was hinting to us that dragon communion is a grave transgression, for which the Magma Worms were cursed to crawl the earth upon their bellies as shadows of their former selves.
And yet the Drake Warriors are still stupid enough to believe everything else that everyone says. I guess this is the kind of info that's kept hush-hush for them, specifically, because they still need people to take out Bale.
And finally, with the DLC, Dragon Communion being called a curse makes sense. Once consumed, I think these Drake hearts, still beating, are resisting their subjugation, just as Bale's heart describes, and they eventually overwhelm their devourer, turning their vessel not into a glorious dragon, but into an accursed land-bound worm.
The other people turned into dragons because those were ancient dragons who wanted to become a more humanoid form, right? Whereas for here, these drakes, they don't want any of that, I'm gonna assume. And they're getting brutally hunted down by these Drake warriors, so even in death, they try to fight back, and so this is the result. I see. I would assume that's like the main difference between the two. Although the fact that one is an ancient dragon and the others are drakes is also a pretty big difference.
Instead. So the sacrifice rituals that the Drake warriors were performing in awe of the dragons were having dubious results. And yet, the warriors continued to indulge their appetites.
Well, they promised
according to the Dragon
something
Lord's
else.
plan. Such a grave transgression also retroactively helps to explain Exekis, who was the Dragon Communion Revenger, who was so furious at the Drake warriors that he did not forget his hatred even as he succumbed to the Scarlet Rot. But how many Drake warriors have there really been over the ages? Well, to understand that, let's read the description of the dragon's Calibloom, which you'll find on your ascent of the Jagged Peak. This flower is dotted with gravelstone and has an uncanny shape, coursing with hot blood. Its description reveals that a single flower is said to blossom only once from the hearts of dead warriors who oft partook of dragon communion. So every time you loot this, you're actually plucking it from the bodies of dead dragon communion warriors, which is a fact that really helps to tell a story. This Drake warrior likely died to this dragon. 6 Drake warriors died on their way up the peak, and this one got hit by the most telegraphed boulder of all time. What's more, Calibloom might...
Oh no, he's gonna get shamed for all eternity, the poor guy.
Also actually help to explain what arteria leaves are, which are also found on human bodies, and are also coursing with blood. So I bet these grow from the hearts of dead warriors as well. Let me take my speculation on Calibloom one step further. So Calibloom's wide red leaves are essentially identical to the leaves on these plants, right?
Yeah.
So I think that might mean that these plants might be Calibloom as well. They just don't have the flower anymore, because the flower is said to blossom only once. And these plants blanket the earth in really appropriate places for the story. Here, at the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion,
Wait, does that mean that each of these, all of these little plants, every single one of them, is one Drake warrior? And they bloom only once, so these probably bloomed in the past and have already passed that point? If that's so, then that's an insane amount of warriors who fell for it. Who tried to take out Bale and did not succeed.
For example, and here at the Jagged Peak Summit, which is Bale's domain, where all the Dragon Communion warriors are coming to challenge him. So the fact that his arena might be carpeted in Calibloom, and the fact that this arena does feature a ton of skeletons, is meant to convey, I think, that Bale has seen many challenges, and that
none
all
of them
have
have
failed
succeeded
to take him down. But what about the plants at the Grand Altar? Did a great battle take place here as well, between Drake and Drake Warrior? Well, I think there's evidence that it did. As if the gargantuan dead Drake, with what looks like its heart missing from its chest, wasn't enough. Walk on its wing, and you'll be able to loot Dragon Communion harpoons, which I can only assume you're pulling out of its flesh. These were tools of the old Dragon Communion warriors, the keyword there being old, which, in addition to the harpoons sporting sharp gravelstone, might suggest these warriors had the ancient dragon's favor back when the ancients were taking a direct hand in wiping out the drakes. As for what actually killed the gargantuan drake, if you go behind it, you'll notice an enormous spike jutting out from the nape of its neck, and if you travel over the drake's head, you'll actually be able to get up there and get a closer look down at the thing. So through the center of the object is this straight piece of what looks like metal, around which some sort of stone growth has formed. What's more, the metal has a blue-green tinge to it. So what is this thing? My first impulse was just to call it a huge Dragon Communion harpoon. The metal rod down the center might have simply corroded over time, and the smaller harpoons do actually have a bit of a green tint to them as well. And green rust is common to metals like copper and brass, after all. On that note, I've seen some speculation online that the green could indicate that the metal is verdigris, which, according to the verdigris discus, is a corroded metal known for its heft. This is a great theory, and it really helps to tie the harpoons to crafting techniques that would have become unique to the realm of shadow. But to play devil's advocate, none of this really explains the rounded stone growths around the metal, which aren't sharp gravelstone like you'd think they should be on a harpoon. One theory I came across that's really cool is that this stone buildup might be fulgurite, which apparently is a sort of fossilized lightning that can occur from lightning strikes. Therefore, another theory is that this giant stake might actually be the remnant of a lightning strike, or perhaps more accurately, a Dragon Communion harpoon that has been imbued with lightning. I feel like that combines all of the theories together.
Okay, honestly, really cool theory. I didn't know that there was an actual stone formation formed by lightning like that. That's, I guess the more you know. But it makes sense that they'd be using this for combat, but like, who would be wielding the giant harpoon? Was there a giant who was also a Dragon Communion warrior, or was somebody just built different and that strong to just, you know, shoot that through the sky? Well, probably magic. Yeah.
Credit to user EDUTY for dropping this geology knowledge on us.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
For this giant drake to have been struck down by lightning, that would suggest that the ancient dragons were around to smite it down. So, is there evidence for the ancient dragons being a part of this battle? Well, maybe. An item called Sharp Gravelstone is found nearby on the corpses of lesser drakes. The description reveals that this Sharp Gravelstone is actually the scale of an ancient dragon that has supped on the blood of lesser dragons. Suggesting ancient dragons were here, I think, and that they were feasting upon the drakes. What's more, red fulgerbloom is found on the south coast of the Jagged Peak and is said to bloom where the red lightning of the ancient dragons strikes the earth.
So then, yeah, that's guaranteed then. The giant harpoon was thrown by one of the ancient dragons and impaled one of the bigger drakes, finally taking it down for the Dragon Communion warriors to do their thing and suffer the consequences.
This description seems to suggest this flower was, in fact, not set to bloom by the flame lightning that assails the peak, but rather by the red lightning of the ancient dragons. And this is probably a good time to mention that there are ancient dragons upon the Jagged Peak who are not hostile to Baal. So it might not have even been the hostile ancient dragons that generated the fulgerbloom or supped upon the drakes. It might have been friendly ones.
Okay. So then no, it wasn't a one-man show for Baal. If that's the case, and they are on his side, then there must have been like a group of ancient dragons that were not happy with order.
This brings us to ancient dragon Senesax, who, among other ancients, is actually on Baal's side. And it's very interesting to note that these ancient dragons saw some merit in Baal's challenge to Placidusax. For them to switch sides, you'd think there really must have been some injustice in the Dragon Lord's persecution of their lowborn kin. Either that, or perhaps these traitorous ancients simply believed that Baal was stronger than the Dragon Lord, and maybe they believed that might makes right. It's,
I mean, a simple but classic reason. We can see this kind of hierarchy in, well, different depictions of dragons in media as well, so yeah. I wouldn't be opposed to accepting that theory, but it does seem a little bit lame, considering how intricate everything else has been so far.
impossible to know for sure. We learn about these traitorous ancient dragons from the hefty red lightning pot, which does this lightning AoE where it strikes and reads, "The ancient dragons who betrayed their lord to side with a tyrant were known for wielding branching red lightning." At first I thought that the branching red lightning would be this attack, but it can't be. These are actually called lightning stakes, and they're the hallmark of other dragons who definitely are not on Baal's side.
Yeah,
Thus,
every
I
ancient
think the
dragon.
branching red
Okay.
lightning is instead this sort of chain lightning that is characterized by its ability to branch out and chain between enemies. This is the same lightning that Senesax and the new lightning consumables generate. One fascinating thing that happens after you defeat Senesax is that when you reload the area, the space Senesax occupied will instead be filled with a number of these slimes that have imbued with
chain
red
lightning in them.
The implication being, I think, that Senesax's flesh has degraded into this form. Fun fact, in the DLC Early Access, these were accidentally silver tears imbued with red lightning, which they quickly corrected to these fleshier variants instead upon release. And I think it's a significant
So it's definitely meant to be
change
his
because
flesh.
in the game's data, this variant of slime is called Wriggle Carrion, and carrion is explicitly defined as a dead animal's decaying flesh. You might not think that the ancient dragons would have flesh, but they do. They can bleed, they can be
Underneath their
poisoned,
scales.
they can rot, and they can die if they are severely wounded. So too, apparently, can they become undying carrion, imbued with red lightning. Now, it is a bit weird that these are the only ancient dragons to turn into this sort of carrion. However, maybe it only happens to Senesax and her brood because they wield that branching red lightning that we talked about. Maybe that's how the carrion inherited this red lightning.
How would that work? Does like the lightning give them life even after death? Like the meat has its own sentient style because you use chain lightning? Or maybe it's again one of those mutations that makes this particular dragon and their descendants different. Actually, if that was from a mutation, then would that mean that they were also kind of like discriminated against by the Order, by Placidusax? So in that case, it would make it a pretty reasonable choice to side with Baal instead. But then again, like, how would they know that if they died, there would be fleshy little bits walking around with lightning inside of them? I don't think they died before.
At least. Anyway, I think From Software implemented this carrion spawn because they wanted to signpost other areas where ancient dragons, like Senesax, would have once stood upon the jagged peak. So now we know that where there's carrion, there was once an ancient dragon. And sure enough, wherever you find this red lightning-infused carrion, you'll also commonly find ancient dragon smithing stones nearby, which are the scales of these beasts. Therefore, I think that in these places ancient dragons died. But whether they were allied with Baal and died to Drake warriors...
I mean, it's probably a big mix-up, and there likely isn't going to be enough evidence to suggest like how many and who was on whose side. Yeah, there was some war here long ago between ancient dragons that were with Baal and others that were with Placidusax. Potentially during that war is when that giant harpoon is stuck in the back of the neck of that drake.
Or whether they were allied with Placidusax and died assaulting the jagged peak, I think is up to you to decide.
Curse you, Baal!
Rip that drake.
What a sight! A A warrior true, if ever one there was. A fellow Drake warrior.
In Egon's second encounter, he's somehow made it to the base of the peak.
Somehow.
Despite his injuries. I suppose that by defeating the ancient dragon man,
cleared the way for him?
In a way, you cleared the path for him that he could not conquer himself.
So he just slowly crawls his way over there somehow? Well, where there's a will, there's a way, I suppose.
Because of you, he can go down and out of the chasm that requires a dragon communion warrior to be brave and show no fear.
Egon. Piteous Egon. Do you not remember? Conjure your past, how once you were, when fear was yet foreign to you.
Dang. I mean, that one encounter with Bale must have really messed him up. Understandably so.
Drake warrior, dear friend, grant me this one wish. Take this finger, my finger, scale the jagged peak, face Bale the Dread, and when you do, summon me.
Oh yeah, sure, buddy. That's such an easy task to do. Yeah, I'll do it for free, man. Well, I guess from a gameplay perspective, you've got an NPC fighting alongside you. Makes the fight a little bit easier to kind of distribute that aggro.
Summon my soul. My limbs are limbs no more. My heart is twice over filled with fear. But a Drake warrior I remain. And my soul yet lies on the mountain.
With this, you bring Egon on your quest. Or rather, he brings you on his. Egon's bell-bearing that you loot here can be used to craft Egon's harpoons, which can be fired from his bow, which is imbued with Egon's obsession. The harpoons read, "The broken Drake warrior Egon made these one by one in the midst of his agony so that Bale the Dread himself would know fear." But I think Bale has already known fear. At the behest of a great enemy
100%.
who he fled from after suffering his grievous wounds, which included the loss of a leg. It's the same as what happened to Egon.
I remember that name well.
I see. It's kind of like the beast and the hunter paralleling each other.
The broken Drake warrior, driven by bottomless hunger and fiery ambition. Precisely what the Dragon Lord envisaged for men who partake in dragon communion.
Oh yeah, 100%. Egon is like the perfect example of what they want from the Dragon Warriors. Even with his legs gone, this man still wants to do it. Even though he can't bring himself to do it because he's so fearful of Bale, he will give his soul literally to a passing Dragon Warrior to hopefully, maybe take out Bale. There's clearly nothing left for him in his life. He can't really foresee any other end to his life than to continue fighting Bale, which is honestly just really sad, but also why I find like revenge stories to be a little bit shallow, because once you achieve that revenge, what then? It's like, oh, cool, that happened. I guess I can die now. That's probably what's going to transpire here.
The mad hunger and fierceness of spirit that only flows from those young and short of sight. He rather reminds me of Bale. In fact, such thoughts are unfathomable to ones as old as we.
Hey, once again, parallel between the beast and the hunter. A classic in media. I really want to say that like they have this unspoken respect for each other in like the most messed up way possible, but that's probably not what they're going for here.
So it's clear that Egon was designed as a parallel to Bale.
Yeah.
Someone who is wounded,
My arms! My legs!
furious,
Baal! Vile Baal!
terrified, but unbowed, defined by an unrelenting will.
There is life in me yet! I will soon feast upon your heart!
That will is present in Baal's descendants as well. We can look to the Ghost Flame Dragon in the Realm of Shadow for proof of this. Ghost Flame Breath reads, "The land of spirit graves is home to all manner of dead, and even the corpses of fallen dragons found their way there. Several of them were endowed with such vivacity that, even in death, they could not fully die." Speaking of the Realm of Shadow, I wonder, has Marika's veil over this land had any effect upon Baal? When Baal challenged the Dragon Lord, it would have been back when the Realm of Shadow was still a part of the Lands Between. And only then, long after Baal retreated to the Jagged...
Oh yeah, that's right. It wasn't always the land of the dead. So no, I retract my previous statement about the Crucible affecting the land of the dead. That wasn't really the case here until Marika's whole thing.
At peak, would the Realm of Shadow have been split off from the rest of the world, becoming a land where death flows to, but not from? But perhaps this doesn't matter at all to Baal, because things between Baal and Placidusax are at a standstill. The Elder Phantom asks, "O Baal, do your wounds yet ache?" and has been waiting endlessly for Baal's fury to crest its zenith, but clearly Baal has done little in this time. The only evidence we have of Baal striking against Placidusax at all, if you can call it that, is the presence of the drakes flying all around Farum Azula. Given this new context of a mutual hatred between the drakes and the ancient dragons, I wonder, are these drakes flying around in some sort of suppression of Farum Azula? Or is their presence this environmental set piece that we were never supposed to look too far into?
Honestly, it's probably the latter, because it looks really freaking cool. But you know, one can theorize and one can dream, because ultimately, this doesn't really make too much sense. And if they were just constantly flying around here and not trying to even go on the offensive, then what's even the point?
I'd love to know if anyone has any good speculation on this. Perhaps there's little these drakes or Baal can do to reach the Dragon Lord. Because Placidusax, as mentioned in our last video, has long dwelled in his seat at Farum Azula, in his place beyond time, waiting for his god to return. So maybe he can't even be reached there, physically at least.
My dear Lord Placidusax, tonight, like every night, my solace is yours. May it grant you sleep in your place beyond time.
Somehow, the Dragon Priestess devotes her sleep to Placidusax.
Somehow.
An act that likely makes his eternity of waiting easier to bear. And yet, he would abandon her in a mere instant should she drink Tiolie's concoction and falter in her duty.
I have broken my pledge. I succumbed to the deep slumber that was meant for my lord. It was a craven act of a foul and lowly beast. Forgive me, good warrior. My lord will no longer look upon me. I have fallen from grace. And
just because you fell asleep?
No longer. Go on. Leave me be.
Here, Florisax laments that she has fallen from grace, which I feel like might be wording that intentionally draws a parallel with losing the grace of the Golden Order. The dragons did once have the Elden Ring after all, so it makes sense that the ancient dragons could have once had grace. But now Florisax has lost Placidusax's grace, and she lost it just like that. I think this serves to prove just how painfully prideful the ancient dragons are.
Right? It must have been stifling living under that order then. You think it would be good, but yeah, no, not at all. I can see why Baal's mad. She literally just fell asleep. And now she's just done for.
I may be fallen, but I need not surrender my honor. On second thought, I believe you do owe me something for the transgression. On a mere whim, you've stripped me of my one and only lord. As such, I require another. You. One day, may you become a dragon whole, a lord of your own making. Lead me, and I will follow, my good lord.
Oh.
In following this questline, you'll earn Florisax's affection.
Intriguing? I'll take it.
The love of the ancient dragons has been documented previously with Vike, and it's evident here too
that is his
with
name.
the Dragon Bolt of Florisax you receive. It reads, "There was a time when the priestess never knew love, and thus never used this incantation herself." It's interesting to note that under Placidusax's reign, she did not experience love, but now, according to her spirit ashes, she not only has a human form, but now she has acquired a human heart as well. All thanks to her bond with you.
And all this happened because she fell asleep once. I mean, a better love story than Twilight. You know, I gotta keep this in mind then. If I ever get to this part of the DLC like 3 years in the future, gotta do this. But that's also comes into question of like, even though their forms are humanoid, does that mean they never truly experience what it is to be human until they fall from grace, quote unquote? They fall out of Placidusax's grace. Would this be the very first case for one of these ancient dragons who have, you know, given their hearts during a dragon communion to have become more human? I suppose so, because the other one is a dragon warrior and he's just kind of there fighting you.
Of course, this love is conditional on whether you can slay Baal or not.
Oh yeah.
Before we show off Egon's fight with Baal, I want to take a moment to shout out Displate, who are the sponsor of this video. If you're looking for a dragon-themed print, we actually do have one on there. It's called Guardian of Moonlight, and I reckon you'll have a fun time looking for all the references hidden within. But when you go to buy a print, keep an eye out now for the new Textra option, which is available on select prints in large size as well for the first time. Selecting this option gives a textured finish to your print, adding a depth that can really catch the light beautifully at certain angles. And with the link below, for a limited time you can get 27% off if you buy 1 or 2 prints, and up to 33% off if you buy more than 3. So let me know in the comments if you pick anything up. But back to the video. On your way up the jagged peak, you might have noticed the dried molten rock at the base. It's a reminder that the jagged peak was a volcano once, though it seems dormant for now. In the surrounds are countless dead drakes, many with that sharp gravel stone upon them that seems to indicate that they were victims of ancient dragons. But even though the description says that they've been supped on, a part of me also thinks they might have just been victim to each other. These dead drakes are surrounded by a jagged peak drake here, and further up 2 jagged peak drakes clash with each other. Such a thing reminds me of the description of the horn-strewn excrement, which reads, "It is said that the deadliest of the horned predators enjoy the sport of hunting and devouring other horned creatures." Their clash, I think, is this return to the wildness often seen in the days of the Crucible. In times long past, life was, after all, a crucible of competition. And
I mean, you know, seeing 2 animals of the same species fighting each other isn't abnormal to see in nature. So that is a likely explanation that obviously the one that is still left standing, with all of those other dead drakes surrounding him, is going to be one of the stronger ones and has claimed that territory. I don't know. It could be other reasons as well. Maybe simply fighting for the sake of fighting too.
One revelation from the newfound Bear Communion incantation is that only through desperate battle with the feral wild can one discover a god unique to oneself. So going back to what we said at the start of this video, I feel like there is a connection being made here to the Crucible, to the wildness that is so typical of it. A wildness that persists in the drakes, despite the order once granted upon their kin. At any rate, the biggest threat to Bael still isn't from his drakes, it's from you and Egon. Once, Egon was nothing more than a poor scavenger of battlefields, but then he found honor through dragon communion.
Here we go. Let's see it.
Curse you, Bael! I hereby vow you will rue this day. Behold, a true Drake warrior! And
Egon, fucking help me, man! Bro's just constantly talking and doing his little bit. We're freaking dying in the background. God, this is such a good idea.
die, Egon!
Bro, help! I'm dead.
Your fears made flesh.
The music cutting
From
in and cutting
Egon's
out.
dialogue,
It's great.
we can note an interesting reveal, that the phantoms of others are embodiments of the soul. It's almost as if Egon's finger is furled in invitation to fight alongside him and fulfill the dream that he wasn't able to achieve in life. In Phase 2, Bael's fury finally crests its zenith, and he spontaneously generates wings of pure flame lightning,
So freaking
evoking
epic.
the second set of wings that ancient dragons have, the second set of wings that he was born without. Now the battle nears its end.
Wait, so all ancient dragons have this second set of wings that they can summon? Or, well, I mean, the ancient dragons have like 2 sets of wings, right? So maybe this is the 2 rare ones?
Thank you for watching.
Solid of scale you might be, foul dragon, but I will riddle with holes your rotten hide with a hail of harpoons. With every
Speak a big
last
talk.
drop of my being.
Make sure you get the job done. Perfect shot.
Bael the Dread. You shall haunt me no longer. Yeah!
So happy.
Before I go, special thanks as always to MissPap1 for just knocking it out of the park with the cinematography in this video.
Honestly, yeah.
Particularly the Bael and Egon sequences, which were amazing. Also, 6 or so of those shots were also thanks to Much118x, so special thanks to them as well for letting us use some of their cinematography in this video. They've been helping with the next Prepare to Cry as well, so look forward to that.
Who is that
Thank
lady?
you again for watching.
Dude, the bit at the end there was freaking fantastic. It was such a great idea. I don't really know Egon's character, but from the little that we've seen of him here, it does make a lot of sense that that's exactly what he would do. I'm actually really glad that we got a lot more answers to the Lord of the Dragons here, as well as an expansion of it. Even if a lot more kind of remains open-ended and some people might not enjoy that kind of thing. But it gives more room for many different interpretations that they might play on in future content. I don't recall if they said that they were going to do like another DLC or maybe something in the future. But I kind of wish I knew a bit more about Bael's motivations and whether or not it was simply just the fact that order and the discrimination that happened, or was there something more to it? Something foul with Placidusax, considering how easily this dragon just throws their kin under the bus. But yeah, anyways, my dudes, that's gonna be it from me. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope y'all enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.